Let me tell you about a thriving manufacturing business that did everything right and then stumbled. The company, a mid-sized food and beverage producer, had developed an entirely new category of beverages that became extremely popular with consumers. Their 4 manufacturing plants were running 24/7, trying to keep up with demand, but were still unable to fill all of the shelf space that retailers were willing to offer them. The product was simply flying off the shelves too quickly. This is when some larger competitors, with deeper pockets and a host of other superior capabilities, stepped in with imitation versions of the product to soak up the latent demand, exploiting the market that they had created and threatening to capture their future sales and profits. The head of operations for the company was desperately trying to get more production. Plans to construct new manufacturing plants were already underway, but it would be 18 months or more before any of them would come online, giving the competitors a big window to establish a foothold in the market. This operations head was hounding the existing facilities about ways to increase production, but all he heard back was that the plants were maxed out, that they were at 100% of their capacity, and that there was nothing more that could be done to increase output. But fear not, this story has a happy ending. In the face of this challenge and the healthy skepticism around capacity, the organization went on to increase production from these existing plants by more than 25%, enabling them to keep their competitors at bay until their new facilities could be completed. And today, they remain the dominant player in their market. The approach they use to go beyond 100% of perceived capacity can help any manufacturer who fears that operational limitations may prevent them from capturing demand. Those who believe they can sell more but aren't sure how they would produce the additional volume. They know that throwing money at additional equipment and staff is always an option, but either don't have the time, the resources, or frankly the patience to go down this road. They sense their manufacturing process as opportunities to improve, and they want to see it running better. If you're seeing any of the following telltale signals in your business, this approach may be right for you. Number 1, your operations are being stretched to the point that customers are noticing, orders are shipping late, lead times are too long, or you have quality issues that are escaping into the market and you're fielding angry phone calls as a result. Next, you sense your sales team is not putting their foot down on the gas out of fear that any new customers would be underserved. Number 3, you're being told your manufacturing process is maxed out, that it's at 100% of capacity, and that there's nothing else that can be done except to spend capital. Next, people are so busy running the day-to-day operations that they don't have time to step back and work on performance improvement. They have some ideas, but aren't ever finding the time to pursue them. And finally, the shop floor workforce is stressed out and at risk of disengaging culturally from the business. If you're seeing one or more of these symptoms, a beyond 100% approach to improving manufacturing performance can help your business. The villain in this story is not your competitors. It's the perception that your manufacturing footprint is maxed out and that there's nothing else that can be done to improve its performance. This sentiment ensures that operational limitations will persist and constrain growth. So long as this maxed out perception prevails, any campaign to improve performance is wasted effort. If you believe meaningful improvement is just not possible, you're going to prove yourself right. It's only when we see the performance horizon as being far away that we mobilize for a breakthrough. At this point, you may be asking, but what if my manufacturing process is actually maxed out and there is nothing left that can be done to increase output? Let me explain why this is almost never the case and, regardless of the circumstances, why the perception of being maxed out simply can't be trusted. When new manufacturing assets are first commissioned, we perceive there being abundant potential to improve them. We train operators to run the new equipment. We create work instructions. We centerline our changeovers and conduct preventative maintenance. We performance test the equipment and engage the equipment vendors to help. As a result, output begins to climb, but there are setbacks to overcome. Once we've captured the low-hanging fruit, the gains become more hard-won. Eventually, performance plateaus, and besides some daily fluctuations, it either remains flat or perhaps increases slowly. What we don't realize is that we've been mentally trimming away the remaining potential of the process until the perception of 100% is so close to current performance as to be essentially the same. Some of this potential trimming is premeditated, for example, considering 85% OEE as the world-class benchmark to strive for. Some of it develops in an ad hoc fashion over time, such as blaming performance issues on inconsistent raw materials, or SKUs that are more difficult to run, or staff turning over too quickly, or equipment being too old, or management not listening to the workforce's ideas, etc. And finally, potential trimming also happens proactively, where we acknowledge that opportunity to improve exists, but we do so in a way that prevents us from pursuing a breakthrough in performance now. This includes capital projects that will solve all our problems but are far off into the future and may never be funded, or a pipeline of improvement ideas that keep getting pushed off because we're too busy. Even the budgeting process, where next year's target is based on this year's performance plus a little bit, reinforces the notion of being at or near 100% of potential. Once you understand how the perception of being maxed out develops, you can do something to change it. I'm going to share with you a 5-step approach to going beyond 100% of perceived capacity, increasing your output by at least 20%, and ensuring that operations are not inhibiting growth. The first step to going beyond 100% is to convince a critical mass of people that it's possible. You do this by thoughtfully questioning manufacturing performance relative to its unconstrained theoretical potential, and in the process unearth some evidence that the maxed out narrative is not all it's cracked up to be. In our beverage company example, the head of operations started by asking about the speed the filling machine was running at on one of the key production lines. The manufacturer rated it to run at 800 bottles per minute, but typically it ran in the 500 to 550 range. He was told the reason was low fills, in that when you turn it up, some bottles don't get filled all the way. They showed him, and sure enough, at 600 bottles per minute, some partially filled bottles began to appear. Then the executive asked a good question. Which filler heads are these low fills coming from? In reference to the 64 individual filling heads spaced around the filler's carousel design. This was not easy to determine because the individual heads were not labeled, and once a bottle had been filled, there was no way to tell which filler head it had come from. However, when they took the time to track the low fills back to their respective filler heads, the team found that they were all coming from the same 3 heads. This indicated that there must be a way to solve the low fills issue and speed up the filler. Along with some similar findings in other areas, the operations head became convinced that the plant could go beyond what was thought to be 100% of its capacity. Almost all breakthroughs in performance are achieved by working on a small number, less than a handful of big opportunities. However, when a manufacturing process is perceived to be maxed out, only small incremental opportunities are visible. In our beverage company example, when the head of operations asked one of the facilities about what were the big problems constraining output, the response he got was that the biggest issue in the last quarter happened when the local electrical substation was struck by lightning and the plant was without power for a shift. In other words, when he asked what could be done to increase output, the answer he got was, in essence, to try and prevent an act of God that, over the course of the year, amounted to only a couple of minutes of lost time per day. You can't deliver a breakthrough with a flat Pareto of opportunities like this. In operations that have been perceived as maxed out, the big opportunities are typically hidden and must be rediscovered. In the beverage company's case, being able to run their filling lines at 800 bottles per minute rather than 500 was a big opportunity that had previously been hidden. There were similar large opportunities in other areas as well. To deliver a breakthrough in performance, you need to make resources available to do the required work. This is never easy, especially for small and medium-sized businesses where people often wear multiple hats, but it's necessary. Mobilizing for a breakthrough means making a meaningful portion of your best people's time available for a given period, typically on the order of weeks, to slay the dragons that are limiting production so that you can continue to grow the business. It also means avoiding a few pitfalls, the first of which is shortchanging the initiative by asking people to deliver the breakthrough in addition to doing their day jobs. This is a token gesture appropriate only for small incremental improvements that you're prepared to fail at. Second is giving in to those who say, we don't have time to do this. No doubt there will be some short-term pain in order to make people's time available, but if you're working on the right opportunities with the right plan, the payback will be well worth it. Remember, this commitment of resources is only for a matter of weeks, after which you'll have broken through the perception of being maxed out, most likely leading to a realignment of people's activities anyway. A third pitfall is to allow unhealthy skepticism to undermine the commitment of resources. Healthy skepticism is great, and healthy skeptics often become the strongest supporters. But unhealthy skepticism that comes from a place of fear that a breakthrough in performance could somehow undermine me personally must be confronted directly during this step before moving on. Step 4 is where the rubber meets the road. Many well set up improvement projects still fail to produce their anticipated business impact, or this impact is not sustained. In our beverage company example, the improvement team felt they had a big win when problem-solving an accumulation table intended to protect the filler, the line's bottleneck, from stoppages at the downstream labeling machine. When the labeler went down for a couple of minutes every so often to load a new stack of labels, the accumulator was supposed to fill with bottles, then empty back out once the labeler had restarted, enabling the filler to keep running. Instead, the accumulator setup was actually magnifying these stops, turning a 2-minute stop at the labeler into a 4 or 5-minute stop at the filler. The team identified some adjustments that could be made to eliminate these filler stops, and the team's mechanic made the changes once the team had broken for the day. However, that evening the line seemed to run much worse than usual, and when the team returned the next day, all of the changes had been reversed, and a few additional ones had been made to boot. As the improvement team soon learned, there are 4 distinct phases that every sustained improvement project must pass through. The first is the problem-solving phase, where opportunities are methodically analyzed in order to determine their root cause and develop solutions. This is where our improvement team got to and then stopped short. Next is the technical trial phase, where, under controlled conditions, the new solutions are tested to validate that they actually work and to iron out any bugs. Third is the practical trial phase, where the solutions are tested for a longer period under uncontrolled conditions to identify and resolve any practical challenges that arise. And finally, when technical and practical trials have been a success, comes implementation, where the solutions are rolled out across all parts of the facility. With this phased approach in mind, the beverage company team was soon able to make their improvements successful and sustained. Once the big problems that were constraining output have been solved, and the extra production and additional profits are flowing to the bottom line, it's time to step back and celebrate the impact your team has had on the business. You don't just want to capture a few lessons learned and move on, you want to actually internalize what you've achieved. For our beverage company, they had taken 4 different facilities, each of which was thought to have been at capacity with nothing more that could be done to increase production, and increased that production to over 125% of capacity, essentially doing the impossible to enable their company to remain the market leader, fend off competitors, and secure future revenue and profits. But in addition to that, and maybe even more importantly, they internalized how they had broken through the mental and cultural barrier of believing they were maxed out. They realized that without the diligence to keep challenging themselves, they could soon wind up right back where they had started, believing in some new artificial limitation and holding themselves back. They committed to doing everything they could to try and avoid this, with a healthy sense of both curiosity and humility. When you use these 5 steps to successfully break through production limitations and go beyond 100% of perceived capacity, there are several benefits. First, you produce a substantial increase in throughput that alleviates your near-term concerns around service level, growth, and costs. You also redefine your manufacturing capacity to well beyond what it was thought to have been in the past. This invigorates your team and primes them to look for the next breakthrough rather than for another reason why the process is already maxed out. In addition, the breathing room you create allows you to develop a deliberate roadmap for raising capacity over time to ensure that operational limitations are never an impediment to growth again. One final thought. If you allow the perception of being maxed out to go on, it will not cure itself. In fact, it will only strengthen and become even harder to address as time goes by. So, if you can avoid it, don't wait to address this. If you'd like a perspective on your particular situation, we can set up a brief discovery call, during which we will clarify how the perception of being maxed out may be impacting your business today, and what you can begin doing immediately to address it. Should there be a good fit with your situation, I can share what working with me directly to take a beyond 100% approach looks like in practice as well.